My daughter changed the locks while I was at the doctor. I didn't discover it until I came home. There was a brand new silver lock on my front door. I stood on the porch and stared at it. Then I pulled my key from my pocket. I inserted it. It wouldn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. For a moment, I wondered if I had somehow gone to the wrong house. But the brass number on the wall still said 214. My address. My home. The house my wife and I had bought 43 years earlier. The house where we had raised our daughter. The house where my wife had spent the final years of her life. I knocked. Someone was inside. I could hear footsteps. Then the door opened. My daughter Melissa stood there. She looked at me without surprise. "Dad." I looked at the lock. Then at her. "Why doesn't my key work?" She took a breath. "Because I changed it." I waited for an explanation. Instead, she said something I never expected to hear from my own daughter. "Dad, you can't live here anymore." I stared at her. "Excuse me." "You heard me." I looked behind her. My furniture was still there. My wife's photographs were still hanging on the walls. Her old rocking chair was still beside the fireplace. Everything I owned was inside. Except me. I asked quietly, "Who told you that you could change the locks?" Melissa folded her arms. "The house belongs to us now." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten to call anyone. I simply looked at my daughter. Because at that exact moment, I remembered something my late wife had told me 3 years earlier. Something I had almost forgotten. "Robert, whatever happens, never throw away the original deed." At the time, I hadn't understood why she was so insistent. That afternoon, I finally did. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 71 years old. And until that day, I believed losing my wife was the hardest thing life could ever do to me. I was wrong. Losing Elena broke my heart. But discovering what my daughter was willing to do after Elena was gone broke something different. It broke my trust. And the strange thing is, Melissa hadn't always been this way. When she was a little girl, she was the center of our world. She used to wait by the front window every evening for me to come home from work. I worked construction for most of my life. Some days I came home exhausted. Some days my hands were so sore I could barely open the front door. But whenever I saw Melissa running toward me, the exhaustion disappeared. She would shout, "Daddy," and I would pick her up. That house was where she took her first steps, where she learned to ride a bicycle, where she brought her first boyfriend home, where Elena and I watched her graduate. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even particularly large. But it was ours. Elena and I bought it when Melissa was 4. We had very little money. The kitchen cabinets were old. The bathroom needed work. The backyard was mostly dirt. But Elena loved it. She planted a maple tree near the porch. She said, "One day we'll sit under that tree and watch our grandchildren play." She never got to see that day. But the tree survived. And so did the house. After Elena died, I couldn't imagine leaving. Every room carried some piece of her. Her recipe cards were still in the kitchen drawer. Her favorite mug was still beside the coffee machine. Her sewing basket was still in the living room. Her rocking chair still faced the window. Melissa knew how much the house meant to me. At least I thought she did. After her mother died, she started visiting more often. At first, I was grateful. She brought groceries. She helped with appointments. She called to check on me. I thought grief had brought us closer. Then her questions started changing. Dad, how much is this house worth? I laughed. Why? I'm just curious. A few weeks later, she asked, do you still have savings? I looked at her. Why do you want to know? I worry about you. I appreciated that. At least I thought I did. Then she asked whether I had updated my will. I said yes. She asked what it said. I didn't answer. That seemed to bother her. One evening, she said, Dad, eventually, this house is going to be mine anyway. I put down my coffee. Eventually isn't today. She frowned. I didn't say it was. You didn't have to. She left shortly afterward. I didn't think much of the conversation until Daniel started asking questions. Daniel was Melissa's husband. He had never been particularly close to me. He was polite, usually, but he was always interested in money, property, investments, anything that had a number attached to it. One afternoon, he came over and said, you know, houses around here are selling for a lot. I've heard. You could make a fortune if you sold. I don't want to sell. He smiled. You don't need all this space. I looked at him. Your mother-in-law and I built our life here. He shrugged. Things change. I didn't answer. That evening, I remembered something Alina had once said. It was shortly before she died. We were sitting at the kitchen table. She looked tired, but her mind was clear. Robert promised me something. Anything. If Melissa ever starts talking about this house like it's already hers, don't let her pressure you. I smiled. Why would she do that? Alina looked at me for a long moment. I hope she never does. That answer stayed with me. After Alina died, I found myself thinking about it more often. Then one day Melissa brought paperwork to my house. She placed a folder on the kitchen table. What is this? Just some documents. For what? Estate planning. I already have an estate plan. This is different. How? She became irritated. Why do you always make everything difficult? I looked at her. Because I read what I sign. She picked up the folder. You don't trust me. I didn't say that. You don't have to. She walked out. 2 days later, I called Samuel Whitman. Samuel had been our family attorney for years. He had helped Alina and me with our estate. I told him what happened. He asked, do you still have your original deed? Yes. Where? In the house somewhere. Find it. Why? Because original documents matter. I searched that weekend. I found an old metal box inside the back of my closet. Inside were insurance papers, old photographs, a few letters from Alina, and the original deed. I unfolded it carefully. My name was still there. Robert Hayes, owner of the property. I stared at the document for a long time. Then I remembered Alina's words. Never throw away the original deed. I put it back in the box. I didn't tell Melissa. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't even tell Samuel where I kept it. I thought I was simply being cautious. I had no idea I would need it so soon. A few weeks later, I had a doctor's appointment. It was a routine visit. My knee had been bothering me. Melissa knew about the appointment. She called the night before. What time are you leaving? About 10. And when will you be back? Probably around noon. Okay. I didn't think anything of it. The next morning, I drove to the clinic. The appointment took longer than expected. Afterward, I stopped at the grocery store. I bought milk, bread, coffee, and a package of Alina's favorite cookies. It was a habit I hadn't broken, even though she wasn't there to eat them. When I pulled into my driveway, I immediately noticed something strange. Melissa's car was parked outside. I frowned. She hadn't told me she was coming. I got out. I walked toward the front door and stopped. The lock was different. Completely different. I tried my key. It didn't work. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I heard voices inside. I knocked. Melissa opened the door. Dad. I stared at her. Why did you change my locks? She sighed. Can we please not do this here? Here. This is complicated. No, it isn't. I pointed at the door. That was my lock. Things have changed. How? She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Then she said, You need to accept that this house isn't yours anymore. I felt my stomach drop. What did you say? You heard me. Who owns it? She hesitated. Then she said, We do. I looked at her. Who is we? Me and Daniel. I almost laughed. Did you buy it? No. Did I sell it? No. Did I sign it over? She looked away. Dad. Did I? No. Then how do you own it? She didn't answer. Daniel appeared behind her. He said, Your will. I stared at him. My will. Yes. My will doesn't transfer my house while I'm alive. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Melissa stepped in. Dad, you're getting older. There it was. The sentence I had been dreading. You think I'm incompetent. No. You just changed my locks. Because we were trying to protect you. From what? From yourself. I looked at my daughter. For the first time in my life, she looked like a stranger. I asked, Where are my things? They're inside. Give me my key. We don't have to do this. Give me my key. She didn't. So I said, Fine. I turned around. I walked back to my car. Melissa called after me. Dad. I stopped. She said, Where are you going? I looked back at her. I don't know yet. Then I drove away. I didn't call the police. I didn't scream. I didn't post anything online. I drove straight to Samuel's office. He looked at me when I walked in. What happened? My daughter changed my locks. He stood up. Why? She says the house belongs to her. Did you sign anything? No. Did you transfer ownership? No. Did you sell it? No. Then why does she think she owns it? I told him everything. Samuel listened without interrupting. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Robert, do you still have the original deed? I looked at him. Yes. Bring it to me. I had the metal box in my car. I brought it inside. Samuel unfolded the deed. He read every page. Then he looked up. Robert. Yes. Your daughter doesn't own this house. I already knew that. But hearing it from him was different. Are you sure? Absolutely. He showed me the ownership records. My name was still on them. The documents Melissa had relied on didn't transfer ownership. Whatever Daniel had told her, it wasn't enough. But Samuel wasn't finished. He pointed to a clause in the original deed. It was something I had never paid attention to. He explained what it meant. Any transfer required specific legal procedures. Melissa couldn't simply take control because she expected to inherit someday. Then Samuel said, "There's another problem." What? If she represented herself as the owner, that's something we need to address immediately. I sat quietly. Then I asked, "What should I do?" Samuel looked at me. "Do you want revenge?" "No." "Do you want her punished?" I thought about it. "No." "What do you want?" "My house." He nodded. "Then that's what we'll protect." The first letter went out that afternoon. It wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It was simple. The property remained mine. The locks had been changed without authorization. Melissa had no legal right to prevent me from accessing the property. The locks needed to be restored. She needed to remove herself from the house. And any further attempt to interfere would be handled through proper legal channels. I waited. The next morning, Melissa called. "Dad." "Yes." "Did you talk to a lawyer?" "Yes." She was silent. "Daniel told me everything was legal." I said nothing. "He said you had already agreed to leave the house to us." "I never said that." "He said you had signed something." "I didn't." Another silence. Then she whispered. I believed him. I closed my eyes. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because I was angry with Daniel. Because my daughter had believed him. She had believed him enough to lock her own father out of his home. I asked, "Melissa, did you ever look at the paperwork?" "No." "Why?" I trusted him. I almost said something harsh. But I stopped. Because Alina's voice came back to me. Calmness is strength. I told her, "You need to come to Samuel's office." She agreed. The next day, she arrived alone. She looked exhausted. Samuel explained everything. The deed, the ownership, the legal requirements, the documents Daniel had shown her. She listened. Her face became pale. Then she asked, "So Dad still owns the house?" Samuel answered, "Yes." She looked at me. "I'm sorry." I didn't answer immediately. She continued, "I thought I was helping. You changed my locks." "I know." "You told me I couldn't live there." "I know." "You said the house belonged to you." "I know." Her eyes filled with tears. Then she said, "Daniel told me if I didn't take control now, I'd lose everything." I looked at her. "Melissa, you were never going to lose everything." She cried. I was scared. I understand being scared. But I did something terrible. Yes. She looked surprised that I didn't soften the answer. I continued. "And you need to understand something." "What?" "Being my daughter doesn't mean you can make decisions for me." She nodded. "I know." "No." I looked directly at her. "You understand it now." She lowered her head. "You didn't understand it when you changed the locks." She nodded again. That conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. We talked about money, about Daniel, about her mother, about the house, about all the things neither of us had said since Alina died. At one point, Melissa asked, "Why didn't you tell me about the deed?" I thought carefully. Because I didn't want to believe I needed protection from you. She started crying again. I looked away. That was the hardest sentence I had ever said to my daughter. But it was true. The locks were changed back 3 days later. I stood on the porch with my old key in my hand. For a moment, I was afraid it wouldn't work. Then I inserted it. The lock turned. I opened the door, and I stepped inside. The house smelled exactly the same. Coffee, old wood, the faint scent of Alina's perfume from the closet. I walked into the living room. Her rocking chair was still there. I touched the armrest, and I whispered, "I kept it." I don't know why I said that. Maybe I was talking to Alina. Maybe I was talking to myself. Maybe I simply needed to hear the words. I kept it. The house, the memories, the promise, and the original deed. A week later, Melissa came over. She stood outside the door. She didn't try to enter. She waited. I opened it. "Hi, Dad." "Hi." She looked at the lock. "I remember when I changed that." "So do I." She nodded. "I hate that I did it." "I know." She looked at me. "Do you forgive me?" I took a long breath. "I want to." She nodded. "I understand. I don't want you to confuse forgiveness with forgetting." "I won't. And I don't want you to think being family means there are no boundaries." "I understand." That was the first time I felt like she really meant it. We sat on the porch. The maple tree had begun turning yellow. Melissa stared at it. "Mom planted that, right?" "Yes." "She always loved it." "She did." She smiled sadly. "Do you remember what she said?" I smiled. She said one day we'd sit under it and watch our grandchildren play. Melissa looked at me. She was right. I looked at the tree. Yes. For the first time in months, we both laughed. It wasn't a perfect ending. Daniel and Melissa eventually separated. I never asked for details. I didn't need them. Melissa started handling her finances differently. She stopped asking about my assets. She stopped talking about the house as if it were already hers. And slowly, our relationship began to heal. Not because everything was forgotten, because we finally had boundaries. And sometimes boundaries are what allow love to survive. I still have the original deed. It's kept somewhere much safer now. But I don't keep it because I'm afraid of Melissa. I keep it because Alina was right. Important things deserve protection. And that experience taught me something I wish I had understood earlier. You can love your children deeply and still tell them no. You can forgive someone without handing them control. You can remain calm without being weak. And you can protect yourself without becoming cruel. My daughter thought she had taken my house. She changed the locks. She stood behind my front door and told me I couldn't come inside. She believed she had everything figured out. But she had never seen the original deed. And more importantly, she had never understood that the house wasn't simply an asset. It was 43 years of my life. It was Alina's garden. It was Melissa's childhood. It was every Christmas morning. Every birthday, every argument, every apology, every photograph, every memory. You can't put a price on that. And perhaps that was the real lesson. The deed proved who legally owned the house, but it couldn't prove who loved it. That had to be shown through actions. And Melissa learned that the hard way. If you've ever had a family member assume something belongs to them simply because they expect to inherit it someday, I'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts. Would you have confronted them immediately? Would you have called the police? Or would you have stayed calm, gathered the documents, and let the facts speak for themselves? Tell me in the comments. Your experience could help someone else who is facing a difficult family situation. And if this story reminded you of something from your own life, take a moment to like the video. Subscribe for more calm stories about family, aging, boundaries, forgiveness, and the lessons we sometimes learn later in life. Because getting older doesn't mean giving up your voice. It doesn't mean surrendering your choices. And it certainly doesn't mean that someone else gets to decide what happens to the life you spent decades building. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing. Sometimes you simply gather the facts. You protect yourself. You wait. And when the truth finally comes out, you let it speak for you. My daughter changed my locks while I was at the doctor. She thought I had nothing left to protect myself with. She was wrong. I had the original deed. But I also had something more important. The patience to wait until the truth was impossible to ignore. And perhaps that's the lesson Elena was trying to teach me all those years ago. Never confuse kindness with weakness. Never confuse family with permission. And never give up your dignity simply because someone you love asks you to. The house is still standing. The maple tree is still growing. Elena's rocking chair is still beside the fireplace. And every morning, I unlock my front door with the same key. Only now, I understand something I didn't before. A home isn't protected only by locks. It's protected by trust. And once trust is broken, rebuilding it takes much longer than changing a lock. But sometimes, if both people are willing to be honest, it can be rebuilt. One conversation at a time. One boundary at a time. One apology at a time. And maybe one day, one key at a time.